link.
Okay.
Okay, it's now live. Bye.
Okay. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us today for alpacas, barrels, and composting, so that you can learn a little bit about the ABCs of sustainable food gardening and more. I'm Ellen Terwilliger, and I am a master gardener here in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and have been a master gardener for about 6-7 years. I kind of lose track. Besides doing things like presentations, I really enjoy working with children and families at Lakeshore Elementary School here in Eau Claire, and have been active in our local association. But working with the public is really something that I incredibly enjoy. So my first love was flowers, and it was my husband who really enjoyed the vegetable gardening. As years have gone by, I thoroughly enjoy having all that wonderful organic food throughout the winter. We have 4 freezers, 2 refrigerators, and lots of canned goods and dehydrated goods that we enjoy eating all year long. So that's one of the real joys with growing vegetables and knowing where your food comes from. So what we're going to discuss today is we'll take a look at, just what is sustainable gardening, and we'll identify how you are currently doing at sustainable gardening. I believe that the library sent you a link, or they will put a link into the chat of a handout I had, which is a self-assessment and I'll read it along as we go too, so that if you don't have that up, you can still take part. And then we'll look at some ways that you can start or improve sustainability in your own garden. The photographs that you will see are all from our gardens and property here in Eau Claire. So one definition that I found that I liked: a sustainable garden works in harmony with nature. And there's many techniques, and those are things that we'll talk about today. How you control pests, how you manage water, those sorts of things that can improve the health of your garden while working to benefit the environment. So we started out, where the one house is here was our original lot. And we're on the west side of Eau Claire at the corner of Menominee and Mount Washington. And 10 years ago, my husband installed solar panels on this property on our garden shed and at the south ends of our house. And in 2010, we had 4 geothermal wells put in 200 feet under the original vegetable garden here. And those provide our heating and cooling. The solar panels run that heat pump furnace, as well as provide all of our other electrical needs. Since then, back in 2015, we added solar panels to this shop garage area. We expanded vegetable gardens in that lot. And then this property on the right of your screen was a condemned property. And we did not really want a lot more people driving up and down that alley. And so we bought it, tore that down, and we've put in a meadow. So I'll be showing you stuff from all 3 of these properties. Our children are now grown, and so we've reduced the size of our vegetable gardening. So the self-assessment has 5 questions, and I'll read those, and you can kind of fill that in or keep track of how you're doing as we go along. On the back of that self-assessment are some definitions and some resources that may be helpful for you as you look at how you can improve sustainability in your garden. So the first question reads, how much attention do you give your soil, and why is that important? So there's 4 answers. The first answer is for 3 points, and you're currently adding compost and organic fertilizer. You apply mulch to protect the soil and conserve water. You don't dig when the soil is wet, and you don't rototill. For 2 points, you're using some organic fertilizer and you mulch. for 1 point, you think soil is just dirt. I really don't think about it. And you get 0 points if you're using chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides, and you don't like to use mulch. So why is the soil so important? Think about your home. There's either a concrete slab or there is a basement that provides the foundation so that your house stays strong. Well, a garden, that soil is the foundation. And you really want healthy soil because then you have healthy plants, better production, prettier flowers, whatever that might be. The first step is to really take a look at what your soil is currently like. Get it tested. You can contact our extension office in Eau Claire County, located in Altoona. You'll get Andy if you call, and he can help guide you through, you're collecting some small amounts of soil from various parts in your garden. You take it in, there is a fee, but you find out how much organic matter is in your soil, what's the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and and the different mineral content. So that is really an important first step. And then the other thing that we really like to think about when I say not rototilling, while I love the way a fresh rototilled garden looks, it changes the structure of your soil. You may need to rototill if you're starting out with sod to get it started, but once you have a good soil or a good garden set up, you can just pull back soil and mulch and get your seeds in and do a great job. You're not changing the structure, it holds water better, and you're not disturbing all those healthy microbes. So let's talk about some ways that you can improve your soil quality. One of the things we can all do is to create compost, and that's really a combination of carbon and nitrogen, your brown waste and your green waste. You want about 2 to 3 parts brown waste to 1 part green waste. And some examples, I've put examples of brown waste. That's your leaves, pine needles, corn cobs, etc. And your green waste, that's the things from your kitchen, your fruit and vegetable scraps, your fresh grass clippings, weeds without seeds, coffee grounds, tea bags, animal manure, eggshells. Those are all great things. So how do you actually go about making compost? We've used a variety of different methods. One of them is tumblers, and there's pros and cons to every one of these methods. The plus side on this is it works pretty quickly. And you can rotate that in 30 to 60 days, you're going to have beautiful compost. The downside is, there's tumblers in there, and if you put in vines, they tend to get caught. You also want to keep the matter that you put in there relatively small and things that'll break down quickly. And, it's quite effective. Another downside, though, is that in the winter, those lids, which kind of screw off and on, they tend to get frozen because there's moisture. So, but they work. Another thing that now we use a little bit, we use instead of the tumblers are these bins. And we've got on the bottom, you will see there's little doors that lift up so that once your material is composted, you can just slide it out. And we have an active and inactive one. And then the 2 white barrels have leaves or hay, in them. And we just layer about 2 parts of leaves to 1 part of the green matter. And after a season, or sometimes it's a year, I pull it out and spread it on the vegetable garden. And that handles a lot of compost. 2 years ago, I've become aware that I really don't want to fall in the winter. And there are times where the path out to those compost bins got really icy, and it's like, don't want to break my hip. And so these are rain barrels that we use, and they're hooked up throughout the growing season. But in the winter, they're emptied out, and I put leaves in the middle, and then I've got 2 bins that I can alternate my kitchen compost, come right out the dining room door and put it in, and then throw on a layer of leaves, and I don't have to put on a coat and boots. And that's been very handy for composting year round. And then for large amounts of compost, we have the heap. And this is where our corn stalks and our sunflower stalks and tomato vines and squash vines, all that big amount of stuff we pile up in the heap. And it takes a good year, sometimes 2, and to compost down, but it handles a lot. Downside, it can be a bit unsightly, although we do grow things on it, sometimes melons and other vining things, and then you really don't know, but part of the year it doesn't look so great. If you live in an apartment, in a condo, and you really don't have a place that's conducive for composting, but you would like to compost your kitchen matter and maybe use it in container gardening or a small raised bed, there's various kitchen composters. This one I don't believe is made. It was made by Nature Mill, and I did not find this model when I more recently did it. But it runs on electricity, just about 50 cents a month, I think is what we figured it was. And you put your kitchen waste in along with some sawdust and some baking soda, and after about a week, you've got compost. Downside is there is that whirring noise that you will hear. And, so it just depends on what works for you. Another way that you can look at enriching and putting nitrogen, especially, back into your soil is organic fertilizer. So alpacas was in the name. Even though I'm in the city, kitty corner across the street is the county, and my neighbors have alpacas and chickens, and we've gotten fertilizer from them. We've had friends who have sheep and goats. We've gotten fertilizer from them, from people who have horses. And, that's get to know people with animals and see if they'll share manure. Another thing that I've done when I want ready to go composted organic fertilizer is to contact Cowsmo. That's COWSMO. And John Rosenholm is down in the southwest corner of Wisconsin. And they deliver by the truckload. Also, Just Local carries their products, but it's organic, cow manure, and he has an organic dairy. So that is a great product. I've gotten it for the school garden, and that's been very helpful. So there's articles out that tell you, like which organic fertilizer has the most nitrogen, most powerful. So I think I have a resource for that on the back of your handout. Mulch is a great way to also manage your soil, keep moisture in and weeds down, and add some nutrients depending on what you mulch with back into the soil. In our vegetable garden, we don't use wood chips because that leaches nitrogen out of your soil to break it down. I do use some wood chips in some of my flower beds, but I don't in the vegetable garden. We use Pete's grass, and my neighbor was just tossing grass over the bank, and so he brings that, and I mulch with that. He has a big yard, and I also get hay bales from a local farmer. A lot don't do the smaller bales. I know a lot of people recommend straw. I like the hay because it adds nutrients back in, and the farmer I get it from, I'm not finding much for weed seeds, so that's worked out really well for mulching. We've also mulched with boards. We have old boards that we use for walking on, and one year I had a bunch extra and I just put them down around the tomatoes and potatoes, left a bit of space around it, and that really holds the moisture in quite nicely. Shredded paper, my neighbor has used that to mulch. Don't use colored paper. There's toxic chemicals in inks, so be careful what you use that way. Or if you're using carpet, make sure it's not new, because there's a lot of toxic chemicals in carpeting. Something else that can really improve your soil quality is to rotate in your vegetable garden what you plant where. We've had a 4-year rotation. We have a cover crop, like an oats and peas combination or winter wheat, and for one of the squares. And then we have had, we'll plant corn, and we'll have beans, squash and potatoes in another area. And what really works out well is if you're growing different shell beans or any kind of beans, they help nitrogen fix back into the soil. And so put your corn there the following year, because that soil will be enriched. Some crops like corn really suck nitrogen out, and as do sunflowers. So don't plant those things in the same place every year. It really makes a difference. And it also helps with pest control, as we'll talk about later. So cover crops are a great thing. Here's our wheat when it's ripe. And we have had a year or two where we've actually harvested the wheat, cleaned it, and then we have a flour mill and we've ground it into flour, baked bread. This is just sort of to see, can we do this? Yes, we can. We kind of wondered, could we survive on our 3 city lots if we had to? We could. Diet might not be quite what we'd want, but if you grow shell beans, you grow some wheat, all your fruit and vegetables, you can get a long ways to feeding yourself. So question number 2, and again, you can keep track of your points. When it rains, where does most of your water go? Give yourself 3 points if it stays in the garden where it belongs and you collect rainwater off of buildings. 2 points if some of it is running off your garden. 1 point if you're really kind of clueless on that point, and 0 points if you note that most of the water seems to run off your property. So what are ways that you can collect rainwater? Decades ago, probably 20 years ago, we heard about a guy in Colfax who was selling rain barrels for $8. And they had jalapeno peppers in, so they were quite fragrant. And I washed those out a couple times. It took a couple years before I didn't smell any jalapeno peppers. But, we use this flexible tubing. It goes in. You can put screens over with the rims. You can buy rain barrels that have nice spigots and are probably easier to use. This is low tech. I like to keep the covers off. I use something called mosquito bits that will kill mosquito larvae. And that, periodically you have to put that back if you empty them out. But I use these to water pots and flowers and things like that. And that seems to really work quite well. We've got, I think, 6 of those. So it's about 300 gallons of those. And then if you look at the bottom left, we have a stock tank above the composting area. And that we use to run out into our smaller vegetable garden. The larger vegetable garden, we have 2 250-gallon tanks. And, we can hook hoses up to those, water strawberries or, whatever needs watering. While we collect about close to 1,000 gallons of water, the thing that I realize is if we have really hot, dry weather, that would water things once. It kind of gets you through maybe a couple weeks of dry spell. The mulch will also really help. If you have bare soil, and we have very sandy soil, it's sort of a sandy, loamy kind of thing, but it does not hold water. It dries out quite quickly. So the water is helpful. We've made good use of that. The other thing you want to always look at is, where does your water go? We had this back alley down the back of our yard, and it used to just be a river. And if we have torrential downpours, we still get some running, but I've done little berms to kind of help. And now we've planted all sorts of things on this bank. And so when water does run down, that kind of slows it, and it feeds those plants as well. Make sure that your water is running away from your house, though. a little bit away. And if you have rain barrels and you're not having hoses and spigots for overflow, then make sure they're tilted so that they're not running back under your foundation. So question 3 is, what watering method do you use most often? If you have a drip irrigation system, give yourself 3 points and give yourself a bonus point if you're using collected rainwater for that. 2 points if you're using overhead sprinklers that have efficient nozzles and really nice uniform coverage. 2 points if you're hand watering in well-drained soil. 1 point if you use overhead sprinklers, but coverage is uneven and you see that a lot of water is running off. And 0 points if you're just hand watering in heavy clay, poor draining soil. So we have used a combination. We've used, excuse me, some drip irrigation. We've used overhead nozzles. My pots, I tend to hand water. So, you know, you need to find out what works best for you, but a combination is what you want to do. Water in the morning. Things like tomatoes, of course, when it rains, they're going to get splattered, but really have mulch down underneath, water at the base, not on the leaves. You have less bacteria splashback, less disease. And I like to hand water sometimes to just like my pots, because then I deadhead and pinch back and do some things like that too. But if you water in the morning, you're not going to lose as much as if you're watering in the middle of the day to evaporation. At night, you can end up with things getting too damp and some mildew and other disease problems. And if you'll excuse me for just a sec, I'll get a sip of water. So question 4, let's take a look at that. What is your approach to weed control? Give yourself 3 points. If you never use herbicides, you cover the soil with mulch and you weed by hand. The second question is, I mulch, but I use herbicides for tough weeding jobs, 2 points. I don't mulch and spend hours hoeing every week, 1 point. I regularly use weed killers, and that would be 0 points. There are times for herbicides and pesticides, and people may make that choice. We've made the choice not to. I remember one year we had squash borer that killed our vines, and we just didn't get a crop. We've come to more sustainable measures through the years, but this is something that we agreed on, from the start, that we did not want to feed ourselves chemicals, expose them to our children or to our neighbors. So, that is your choice. This talk is about how you can be more sustainable, and one of the ways is by not using those chemicals. So we do a number of things. Mulching is one way to really help control weeds. We really try to make sure we have it well weeded before we plant, and then we get those grass clippings or that hay down. And then after that, if you do like a good 2-3 inches of mulch, we just do spot weeding the rest of the summer. And, I like to weed in the flower beds. It's when I look at the flowers and think about them. Weeding in a big vegetable garden, it's not my favorite thing. So mulching is really a very important thing. And we weed out by hand when we do need to weed. But if we try to plant fairly close so that the weeds don't have as much of an opportunity. So how do you control pests and diseases? Give yourself 3 points if you grow mostly pest and disease resistant plants and you rarely have problems. You use organic methods such as beneficial insects and the least toxic pesticides. 2 points if you're not rigid about organic. You sometimes use organic, sometimes you don't. 1 point, you like the idea of organic, but often the non-organic options that are cheaper win out. And 0 points if your attitude is organic is not worth the expense. So, you know, there's a variety of things that you can do to control pests and diseases. One of them is simply prevention. Buying the seeds and seedlings that are disease resistant. That really helps. Mulching really can help too, like with tomatoes. If you have just bare dirt, there's all kinds of bacteria that might splash up and cause a problem. So that can make a difference. Japanese, another thing that we do, we grow potatoes most years, and we've learned, you know, about the potatoes beetle cycle. And if you wait until the second half of June to plant, you will still get a potato crop, and you avoid that big mass of potato beetles because you're past their cycle. Also rotate where you plant so you don't, you know, those potato beetles will leave larvae, and then next year if you plant in the same place, you've got problems again. So those are a few things. Japanese beetles have become a real pain. Traps like this are effective in trapping lots of Japanese beetles, but they can also attract. The general advice is not to use them. There's times we have, and it's worked, but we place them away from what we are trying to protect. Japanese beetles, like right now, when I attended a talk on that, it was about 300 different species, and they've become a real nuisance. So you can hand pick them off, knock them into soapy water, keep an eye on the things that you really want to watch. IPM, if you've studied gardening at all, is integrated pest management. And first of all, you want to just confirm, is there really a problem, or is this just a cosmetic thing on the leaves? So try to identify it. There's a lot of, I'll mention a couple of resources in the next slide that can help you with identify the problem. Then you want to determine, do I need to control this? And then choose the best method of control for your situation. Track your results. So a couple of online resources, and these should be on the back of that handout as well, is the National Sustainable Ag Information Service, ATTRA, and then also our very own UW Plant Disease Diagnostic Clinic. And these folks really know their things. You can take in samples to our local Altoona Extension office, and they can be mailed down there, and they'll help diagnose or send photos. There is a fee for that as well. I would say our biggest garden pests are the two little cute things you see over there on the right, bunnies and deer. We have tried many things in trying to combat bunnies and deer. Solar electric fence kind of worked for a while, but then I found I got zapped more often than did the deer. And of course, bunnies and raccoons can go over or under. The deer eventually wised up, you know, the peanut butter didn't attract them, and so they'd just leap over. So we gave up on that one. Poultry fencing works really well for bunnies. And, you know, I will often do chicken wire cages for my tulips. In the spring, it looks like I grow chicken wire, but it's the only way I can have tulips survive. I've used commercial deer repellent, homemade deer repellent. The secret with this is to change it up, you know, and apply it early in the season. I've already applied twice because they like my serviceberry trees and shrubs and certain things. And so I go out and spray the things early on so that they don't think this is their own personal buffet. And I always have some deer damage, but it really does make a difference. The gallon of water, quart of milk, 6 eggs, jar of Tabasco, that works well. You can get a bunch of it and use a small paintbrush to splatter it on. Downside is, of course, you have to reapply after a heavy rain. Other ways that we control for insects and pests, Physical barriers like row covers can help with certain cabbage and potato beetles and things like that. This down in the lower left-hand corner, we've got 8-foot poles and we use black netting. And then down on the bottom, there is chicken wire, and those are kind of stapled down so that bunnies can't, we have little wedges that we use with screws on them so that the bunnies can't crawl underneath. So, we've tried different things. And of course, there are various traps and things like that. Gemplers, I've ordered things from them. So you can check out different options. So just to kind of provide an overview, first of all, try to avoid your pests with clean seeds, clean water, plant rotation, inspecting plants for insects, physically removing them, or companion planting has been very effective. I had a lot of slug damage one year in root crops, but where I had marigolds planted next to my sweet potatoes, those survived. And so now when I plant potatoes and carrots, I plant marigolds close by and I don't have that problem. Of course, chemicals are an option, but if you are going to go that route, really do make sure that you are reading the label, using it in the amounts that are prescribed, and using protective eyewear, gloves, footwear, and then also make sure you are cleaning your tools with a weak bleach solution, and then dispose any infected plants in the fall. Don't put them in your compost. So let's add up your scores. If you have 12, those 3, 2, 1, or 0, if you have 12 to 15, you're already doing a lot of great things, and keep up the good work. 9 to 12, you're doing a lot of things right. Maybe look at what your weakest score is and try to improve with that. And at 0 to 9, old habits can be tough to break, but maybe start by spreading mulch or starting some form of composting, collecting some water. You can check on some of those sorts of things as well. Sustainable gardening, we need to consider a few other things. You have to think about your own health and your body, your pocketbook, environmental concerns, and then your financial and health limitations. As I've gotten older, I realize in the spring, I really need to start out slowly. I can put in a 10 and 12-hour day, and I've got the endurance. But my elbows, my hands, and my knees tell me that that's not such a good idea. So in the spring, I start out slower. I now do a daily yoga practice right away in the morning. And just in the last 2 years, I've started hiring people for some bigger jobs so that I can focus on the things that I really want to focus on. And then the other thing is to really look at what can you sanely manage. And so, like, we're no longer doing shell beans or trying to harvest wheat. If we grow wheat, it's just a cover crop. And, that puts nutrients back into the soil and keeps weeds from growing. My husband used to think that no good Wisconsin gardener could manage with less than 10 zucchini plants. My attitude is 2 is great plenty. Probably 1 too many is enough. So I'm not a huge zucchini fan. A few are good. The other thing to consider is starting your own seedlings. They've gotten quite expensive. Don't worry in case there's anybody from a nursery. I still buy things, but we like to start some of our own seedlings and then use that food that you grow. Some years we've grown 25 to 30% of what we are eating throughout the year. We have quite a variety of fruit as well as vegetables that we grow. Some additional things that we're trying to do to have our entire property be sustainable is invasive control, reducing the lawn, pollinator planting, and a permeable parking area. So this bank we bought 5-6 years ago, and it was full of buckthorn and garlic mustard. And the honeysuckle shrubs that you see there now, we've removed those. There are non-invasive honeysuckle, but these were invasive. And then I just divided hostas and astilbes and various ground covers and kind of filled the bank up with those. So that's one of the things we've worked on. And there across the road is Sherman Creek and a woods, and there's a lot of buckthorn there. So I have to do buckthorn patrol and garlic mustard patrol because the birds come and drop seeds. But it's really easy to pull out when they're little. It's a pain once they get bigger. One of the things, when these solar trellises, when my husband put those in, this whole area down at the bottom of the screen here had been concrete. And we wanted to put some flower gardens or perennial gardens underneath those trellises and get rid of the concrete because it just sort of turned into a little ice skating rink every winter. So we, this permeable parking area now is out of these concrete blocks. They're quite heavy, you know, and then we planted some lomo grass in there. And we no longer have problems with ice building up there in the winter. It's worked out quite nicely. And even in the winter, it kind of forms some fun patterns. This area used to all be vegetable garden and lawn, and now we have planted native grasses and a lot of native flowers as well along the back. And this is what it looked like 2 years ago when we first planted that. And then last spring, this is what that looked like. And then last fall, here's what it looks like. And even now, I haven't cut down all of these grasses, and it still looks nice. Looks nice year round. I love it in the winter. The hoarfrost this year was wonderful. And besides being more visually interesting, which as a person with an art background is always important to me, it also provides a lot of pollinator habitats for your bees, your birds. There are all kinds of alternatives to lawn. You know, there's things like creeping thyme that I have. I have a weedy lawn, and there's all these pretty violets, there's clover, there's daisies, ranunculus, all kinds of things that grow. My strategy is called keep it mowed, and it'll be fine. So that one property that you saw at the very beginning, we bought it, and on New Year's Eve, we had Mercy Excavating came in and they knocked it down and filled in the basement area. And then 3 months later in March, we had a spring like we have had now. The snow was gone, and Steve tilled that area up since we wanted to plant it with native flowers, annuals. It was a mix from Elk Mound seed as well as a bunch of other leftover flowers. We put it in, and it was like 30 seconds after we got that raked in, we had 8 inches of snow, which was absolutely perfect because a lot of those seeds need that cold to get them going. And then I thought, oh, is anything going to come up? And then I noticed the little lupin leaves, and they're quite distinctive. And I thought, okay, things are coming. So I did it was labor intensive the first 2 years. Now it takes me 2 or 3 hours, and I do it in a couple different sessions. I come in with a hedge trimmer in the spring and cut it down. You know, I can't do a burn in the city. And so first we started seeing some California poppies and zinnias and other annuals. And then as the summer progressed, we saw more. And this was the second year. We had black-eyed Susans, brown-eyed Susans, cornflowers, and anise hyssop and partridge pea. And it is just absolutely a delight. Much more interesting for me than mowing lawn. And that area, so you can see it's kind of a U-shaped, it sustains wildlife through all the seasons. The birds love it, the bees love it, and in the winter, we leave it up so that they still have seeds that they can come and get. One thing I really like to encourage each of you to do is to sustain and grow the next generation of gardeners. Pictured here are my two daughters and my niece. These were young women who, as children, thought I was crazy. They said, we're never going to garden. And my niece lives in Denver. She does container gardening. And my two daughters live in South Minneapolis. And during the pandemic, they turned up their entire front yard and planted vegetable gardens. And they bought an extra freezer too. So I work with children. And the kids will tell me that planting days were the funnest days of the year. So work with kids out there. So just a quick review for the ABCs. Enrich your soil. Find those alpacas and chickens. Compost. Make sure your rainwater is going where you want it to. Consider the most effective watering methods. Collect rainwater. Mulch to reduce weeding and watering. And then look for organic weed and pest control methods and organic fertilizer. And then enjoy the bounty and the beauty of gardening. It sustains me, besides physically, it sustains me spiritually as well. I absolutely love it. Although last year during the pandemic, I will say there is such a thing as too much gardening. Raspberries, grapes, pears, strawberries are all things that we grow and enjoy. Some of our shell beans, corn that I can grind into flour. This was bread that we baked from our flour, pears off of our pear tree, and then different vegetables. So enjoy while you're sustaining yourself and the earth. So we're going to take some questions at this point, and I believe that Cricket and maybe Stacy will be helping out. I will also invite you to email me if along the way you have questions at terwillset@gmail.com. And I will in the future try to answer questions. And if ever you are on the west side of Eau Claire and you're by the Junior Ski Jump Hills at the corner of Menominee and Mount Washington, take a look at what we're doing. It's always fun to see what's up. The alley is a public alley. You can walk down that. So at this point, why don't I stop sharing and I will see what questions may have come in. So Cricket, you want to unmute? Are there some questions in the chat here? Okay, not seeing any questions. Now we can, Cricket and Stacy, either of you have any questions? All right. Well, I do want to thank you, those of you who joined in today. It is always a pleasure to speak to a group that is interested in what they can do to sustain the earth and their gardens and keep themselves healthier in the process.